Welcome back to the Wise Old Owl podcast. I'm really excited to have a good friend and half, maybe the good-looking half of the Canadian Real Estate Investor Podcast, Nick Hill. Nick, cheers for coming on board. We've been planning this for a while.
Thank you, sir.
Well, I want to get right into it.
Let's do it.
What inspired you and Dan Foch to start a podcast? Like, it's number one ranked podcast in the country. You guys have done a fantastic job now for how long?
Just coming up to 2 years. We actually, episode 199 comes out tomorrow.
Wow.
Yeah.
And how'd you guys get into this thing?
You know what? I started speaking at like a very, very young age. Like I was speaking in full sentences at like 10 months. My mom just made a joke that I just kind of never shut up. So maybe becoming a podcast host was kind of the perfect thing to do. And, growing up, again, I loved conversation. I wanted to kind of do one of two things, be a race car driver or be a talk show host. I drive a Hyundai Elantra hybrid, so you can see which way that ended up going, at least for now, right? Still could do the race car stuff in the future, but
always a possibility.
Yeah, on a very serious note, what actually inspired us to start the podcast in the way that we did, which was very educational, very data-driven, really almost a mentorship for people that are trying to figure out the crazy world of real estate and investing and business. Was that there wasn't anything out there in Canada that serviced those people, that filled that gap. For anyone that's been listening to podcasts for a long time or has an interest in real estate, you may or may not have heard of Bigger Pockets, which is the largest, or was at one point the largest real estate podcast, and kind of podcast with an education arm and branches and conferences and all that kind of stuff. But that was out of the States. And I listened to it for, probably the better part of 10 years when I really got into really early stages of me trying to figure out and navigate the real estate market. And they were talking about things, buying a place in Ohio for like $35,000, spending $5,000 and flipping it for 70 and making money, and 1031 exchanges and all these interesting things that upon further research didn't exist up in Canada. And the more I started looking, the more I started realizing there was this gap to fill. And years ago, Dan and I, when we first kind of met, we had this dream where we're like, maybe we can fill that gap. Maybe we can start to be the Bigger Pockets of Canada. And I think at this point, we're well on our way to do that. We were given a really great opportunity from an existing podcast that was one of the top ranked, like I think $150,000 to $200,000 a month. They were getting a lot of questions about real estate. They talk about stocks, bonds, capital markets type of stuff. And they found Dan and I, and we'd already had a podcast at that point. It was,
you already had one.
We had one. It was shit. It was, we literally sat around, it was us on Zoom with like no microphones, interviewing other real estate agents kind of thing. But the thing with that, and honestly, every other business or venture or project that I've started, is that I look back on them as all building blocks to help me get to where I am today. Because you said, we launched at number one. Podcast has done very well. It's given me incredible opportunities. It's probably the only reason I'm here now. And, to go back and look at like, okay, well, how did this all start? You just have to go further back and further back and further back and look at the building blocks of business and the things that you've tried to get to where you are right now. So very long-winded answer as to how or why we started.
I commend you because you have an educational slant to it, right? And I'm a big believer in education. I've done, almost 2 decades on TV. I really believe that educating people in a very complex marketplace is critical, right? To avoid people making big mistakes. And we've seen a lot of people make mistakes. Like you spend so much time saving up money, a generation in some cases, you can't fuck it up, right? Like you really have to spend the time to do your due diligence. You got to understand what you're getting yourself into. It's the biggest purchase of your life in most cases. And too many people just go into it blind. So I commend you on the amount of education you put into your podcast. You do a lot of research. I know that every episode you're doing loads and loads of research and notes and making sure that everything you're talking about is explained. You define certain terms. You are really doing a good job helping people understand the different terminologies, acronyms that are in the space. And you're not, just brushing over it. You're really giving a detailed analysis. What prompted that style?
Yeah, I love that. And thank you for asking that. I think that's one of the things that maybe two things. One, it was probably one of the most important things for me that was a part of it, and that was a part of our style. And the reason being is because if you're going to tune into our show one time randomly to kind of give it a shot, and we're here talking about MERBs back in the 70s under fixed and variable and ROI and cash on cash returns and all, ROE and all these other things. I mean, the mortgage space, the real estate space better than most. And it is literally nothing but acronyms, nothing but terms, nothing but things that people like us that are in it every day and live and breathe it, you and I can speak this own language to each other. But if you're trying to get into that world and from whatever avenue, from investing or becoming an agent or a mortgage broker or an appraiser or a tradesperson, whatever it may be, you listen to one episode and there's 8 acronyms you don't understand in that one episode, you're not going to listen again.
No.
But if I can be that person that says, hey, don't worry, you don't need to know what this is, or hey, just a reminder, this is what the Bank of Canada does, this is why everyone's making a fuss about prime rib, and I would say prime rib or something like that and kind of make a joke so people can remember it. But it's really for the masses, right? I mean, the experts in the space, they get a lot of value out of it as well. But we want to be able to speak to the vast majority of people. And that's why I think my partner, Dan, who you've mentioned, who's been on your show before, him and I have a really good kind of sync and synergy because he is probably one of the brightest minds in Canadian real estate, up and coming, still very young, but he's going to do some really amazing things and already is. And, it's funny, a lot of people like come up and tell me like, oh, I think you're like the funny guy on the show. Or you're like the color commentator. You're the relatable guy. And I'm like, yeah. And I'm like, that's not insulting to me whatsoever. I know that about myself. I'm very self-aware, and I'm happy to be the person that can take these complicated things and be able to, I don't even want to use the word dumb it down, but be able to present it in a way that my parents can understand.
Yeah.
Your parents could understand, like your kids could understand, kind of thing, right? Because some of the stuff we're talking about is very important for people to understand. And doing the stuff literally the 20 real estate terms that you need to know, those episodes do crazy well versus are Canadian mortgage bonds going to be subject to whatever kind of policy by the government? Because people are like, what the hell is a mortgage bond? There's a small part of the population that knows what that is and knows why that's important. We want to be able to speak to them, but also the people that are trying to figure out what the hell's the difference between fixed and variable.
Well, I'll tell you something. A lot of people have criticisms of COVID and everything that it created, but one of the benefits that I got out of it was meeting Dan and yourself on the spaces, Twitter /X. When you don't have anything to do during that period of time, you get on these spaces, and I didn't know what it was. And I remember Dan inviting me on, and it's like, why the fuck would he want me on, right? And it was just, a Thursday night event. He did his weekly show and had his national anthem going on, which I hated.
Yeah.
And
it was always it was so bad. It was so bad.
It was so bad. And I guess maybe it was just I gave him 2-3 minutes to get ready. Or
That's what
like
it was. It was I always hustling to be like, hey, where's the co-host? Am I in the car? What the hell am I doing? But
that's where I met Dan.
Yeah.
And I'm fortunate to say that it's evolved into a friendship to a degree, and that's how we met. And I enjoyed those spaces because we were able to chat about what was going on, the challenges people were facing, and we're trying to make sense of what the hell everybody's going through, right? And it was ugly.
Yeah.
And there's parts of it that we didn't think it would stop going up, and then when it stopped going up, it got bad, and here we are. But financial literacy is probably paramount in what you're trying to do. You're also doing a course, and it's evolved from the podcast. It seems like you're really committed to the whole education thing. How's that going, and what's prompted you to focus on that?
Yeah, it's funny. My dad is a high school teacher.
Okay,
and
there you go.
Is an amazing person. And my mom is a social worker. She's an amazing person. And they spent their lives essentially teaching. And they were like, you'd make a great teacher. And I was like, there is no way in hell I'm going to be a teacher. Teachers don't make any money, blah, blah, blah. And here I am with an educational podcast and a course. So I'm really eating my words there. But, I think that we're in an information age, and there's so much content out there, but so many people do nothing with that. So we tried to put a lot of that into a streamlined package based off of those same fundamentals and principles that people have learned from us and know us for. And we've built that trust with them over the last 2, 3, 4 years with what we've been doing. So the education piece, I think, is more important now than ever. As you said, due to lack of education, people have lost tens or hundreds of thousands of dollars.
And that's a generational savings amount, right? Like, these are people saving this money for a long time. And it saddens me because I see it every day.
Yeah, I mean, hey, like I'm in the same space you are, right? I mean, the mortgage space is a bit of a bloodbath right now.
Yeah.
The real estate space, a little bit of a bloodbath. The investing in real estate space, a little bit of a bloodbath right now. And that'll come and that'll go, and we'll see more cycles. And you've seen cycles like this before. We've spoken about it before. But in every one of those cycles, there are people that get completely fucked up. There are people that kind of white knuckle their way through it and kind of make it out maybe better off, maybe a little worse off, but somewhat unscathed, no real growth. And then there are people that come out and have done very well. And I want to be ushering those people into doing very well, because I think in these economic downturns, there are huge opportunities if you know where to spot them. And if you're not just trying to jump on, whatever Roaring Kitty's posting about and GME stock and, trying to buy NVIDIA after it's too late. And I think that's the problem with a lot of the mindset nowadays is, I just want it now. Like I saw my buddy get rich off of some cryptocurrency, or, my other buddy bought NVIDIA at $100. Now it's worth whatever. And, going back to the course that you mentioned, which thank you for bringing that up, free plug, by the way, check it out, realist.ca. I'll do these consult calls with some people, and some people just get it, right? And it's like, thank you. There's some people out there that understand this and are like, look, I want to buy my first property. I want to buy my second property. I'm changing up my investment thesis. I need the expertise. I need to be surrounded by investors. I need multiple support systems, whether it's content and then one-on-one support around that content, and then being able to spend time with other investors and have all that. I need all that. And then there's other people that get on the calls and tell me, like, I'm going to talk shit for a second because this guy's probably not going to listen to your podcast. I'm not going to mention him by name either. But if he is, I'm sorry. So I was on a call with this guy the other day, and young guy, nice. Okay. I read we have intake forms. I read his intake form, and it was like, I want 2,500 units. And I was like, okay. Fuck, same, right? But like, maybe I don't, like, cause that's a lot.
It's a lot of headaches.
Like, yeah, I mean, like Starlight, some of the biggest like REITs in the country own 25 to 15,000 units, right? The smaller ones, I guess, would be in that place. But I'm like, this guy wants institutional level investment here, right? And this is Canada. This isn't the States where you can go buy 2,500 units and no one's going to blink an eye. Like, people notice 2,500 units in Canada, right? So I'm like, okay, I'm going to have fun with this call because I don't think this guy's I don't think he's a good fit regardless. Anyways, I hop on and, we ask all these questions, and I have this good conversation with him to start things off. I'm like, okay, so do you have any real estate investments right now? He's like, yeah, I got a studio apartment. I'm like, okay.
It's a start.
Yeah, exactly. I'm not going to shit on that. Like, good for you. How did that happen? Are you making money? He's like, well, my realtor kind of pressured me into it a couple of years ago, and it's been losing $900 a month ever since. And I'm like,
negative cash flow.
I'm like, okay, so only 2,499 more units to go, but you want them all to cash flow. And then this guy was also saying, he's like, yeah, I want $500,000 a month in after-tax revenue. I'm like, okay, well, what does your capital stack look like? Like, who's getting that money back, and like how many investors and all this kind of stuff. It's like, oh, that was just for me, so I'd have to figure out the rest of it. Again, like, I'm never gonna shit on someone for having grand ambitions. I was once a young man with grand ambitions. Still am fairly young with still fairly grand ambitions. But it just gets to, long story short, this guy was like, oh, I don't think it's the right time for me. I think I need to like do more like searching by myself. I'm like, yeah, but you've been doing searching by yourself for the last 3 years. And the only thing you own is a studio apartment that's negative $900 a month. If you took 4 or 5 of those months of that negative cash flow and instead bought this course as an insurance policy to make sure that you're making the right decision on the next buy, don't you think that would be like, okay, yeah, I never thought about it like that. That's a pretty good idea. And then of course didn't end up buying. I was like, that's okay. I don't think it's a good fit for you anyways. But what I'm getting at with this story is, people nowadays need the education more than ever. Yeah. And the funny, almost ironic thing is there's more education than ever, but it's about finding the right education and having the accountability system and having the support, because you can go watch 1,000,001 YouTube videos and not do anything. I don't care if it's a drop shipping company, t-shirt company, fucking fidget spinners, whatever. You can watch all that content and not do anything. But the ones that are going to do stuff are going to do it anyways, and they need a little bit of help, a little bit of guidance. I've paid for coaching before. I've found mentors in my life, and everything I've done, consider you a mentor. At some points I consider Dan a mentor, and I think he does the same for me because we're always teaching each other things. And I think the combination between content as education is great, but it's not enough. You need those other pillars. You need people around you that are doing the same thing. You need mentors or coaches that are going to push you to do those same things as well. So all that being said, I highly wish Buddy the best of luck, and he's got 2,499 more units left to go. I will not be helping him get there, but I hope that other mentors and investors in his life can do that.
Everybody needs a dream, right? So Nick, I'm going to switch gears a little bit.
For sure.
One of the things I find intriguing as well as admirable is the audience you need to appease. You're a national podcast across Canada. You have to serve different markets. You have to provide content to appease almost every market. And you also get the sentiment from investors that listen to your show across the country, coast to coast. What is the sentiment right now from investors across this country? Like, what are you sensing? Because sentiment's a big driver in what people are thinking and what they're going to do. What are you seeing?
Yeah, I completely agree. I'd even possibly take it one step further and say that sentiment might be one of the most important things in the market, right? The invisible hand, right? I mean, how are you feeling about your finances? Most people don't have the financial literacy to have a deeper understanding. It's just literally a surface level feeling. And if they're feeling pretty good about it, guess what? They go spend.
Yeah.
Whether it's buying pre-construction or buying sweaters or going out to dinner or booking vacations. So I think consumer sentiment is paramount. Now, the tricky thing with Canada is that it's tough to put a blanket statement on the second biggest country in the world, especially from a landmass perspective, especially when that population is so unevenly dispersed, right? I mean, you've got
the disparities all within the 49th parallel.
Literally, right? I mean, 100 and I think it's
85% of it. 100
kilometers or 100 miles from the U.S. border is where essentially 90 or something percent of Canadians live. So that's tough, and it's even tougher when you've got a few markets. We know these markets well: Toronto, the GTA, the GTHA now, where 1 in 4 Canadians live. That's the Greater Toronto and Hamilton area. And then along the 401 corridor, right, from Cornwall to like Sarnia and Windsor. 1 in 4 Canadians live there. So what that 25% of Canadians think and feel in their sentiment is very different than the couple 100,000 that live between Saskatoon and Regina, that are both very affordable markets that they're kind of, blind to a lot of the bullshit that people in Toronto deal with, whether it's traffic or whether it's the fact that, it's $600,000 for 520 square feet and, a balcony the size of this table.
It's not
it's not a big table. And this is a big table, and balconies are not even this big. It's crazy, right? So, it's tricky because we talk to people and we listen to people, more importantly, coming from Victoria, Vancouver. Hell, I've been on calls with guys in Nunavut and Yellowknife, right? Like really cool. I mean, podcast has taken us some cool places. The thing is, it's really hard to put like your thumb on what sentiment is across the country because it's so diverse. And I can tell you sentiment in Toronto, Ontario, from a first-time home buyer, from an end user perspective, buying and selling, isn't good. You know that. I don't think anyone doesn't know that at this point. Yes, there's an interest rate announcement. I don't know when this is coming up, but there may or may not have been an interest rate cut when this comes out. If not, it'll likely be next month. But again, what's that one cut going to do to sentiment for people here in the GTHA?
Fuck all.
Right? It's going to do fuck all for their wallets, but it might fuck with the sentiment a little bit. Now, if you're in Winnipeg, Saskatoon, Edmonton, Regina, any of the smaller places outside of Calgary, Lethbridge, Airdrie, if you're in Kelowna, if you're in, anything from Quebec over, you're a lot less prone to the bullshit that the people in the GTHA
and that's key.
And the people that in the lower mainland have to deal with. And now Calgary is getting there as well. So let's speak to those people. What are they feeling? Well, they're feeling like it's pretty bad right now. And it's probably going to get worse before it gets better. And you can't invest in those markets anymore. So what happens is those people start to smooth out into the rest of the country. We see a trickle into Vancouver went to Calgary. Now Calgary's getting expensive. So people went from Vancouver to Calgary. Now they're going to Edmonton, right? Same thing here in GTHA. Oshawa used to be an absolute shithole. And in COVID, people were buying places there for $1 million.
Nothing against people who live in Oshawa.
Hey, listen, the people in Oshawa that are listening, I love you, okay? We actually have a Durham meetup for the event. It's going to be great for our event series. But Oshawa had no business selling properties for $1 million when years ago they were a couple $100,000 less. So for me, there's still an immense amount of opportunity in Canada. There's immense amount of opportunity in the cities where it's gotten really expensive with all the new zoning and legislation changing. And, you can speak to that a lot better than I can. But from an investor's perspective, I always tell people that are hesitant that, I live in Toronto, I live in Hamilton, I live in Pickering, I live in Kelowna or Burnaby. Where can I invest? I'm like, okay, well, look what the people in New York, Chicago, California, Miami are doing. They're not buying large multifamily buildings. Some of them are obviously, but they're not buying large multifamilies in their backyard. They're going elsewhere to buy. So think about a guy in Miami that owns 2,500 units, let's say, in Ohio or in Memphis or in just outside of Kansas City, like in some of these other markets where you can go and achieve that kind of stuff. And that's the American mindset. Hey, we've got a big country. Let's go and look for opportunity elsewhere. Right? Like you can still hit the 1% rule in many major cities across this country. But it's just cities that people in Toronto and Vancouver are like, no. I could never go there. And you're right again. And, I know your mentality is that you can make money in your backyard as well. And you're completely correct on that. I'm just saying for someone that's maybe just starting out where making money in your backyard, if your backyard is North York or lower mainland somewhere kind of thing, it's going to be a bit harder. Yeah. But there's a ton of places. And that all to be said, I'm just trying to expand people's minds across the country to think about, hey, we've got this huge country. Where is the opportunity going next?
And I commend you on servicing every market because that's hard to do.
We try. It is. Yeah.
When you're preparing your episodes, how do you determine topics? How are you just going?
Are you trying to get some insider information for your phone? What's going on here?
Maybe. I always got to get a guest on. But are you going by flavor of the month? Are you trying to deal with people that have questions about a certain topic that drive you to make a decision? Hey, maybe we should cover this in the next couple episodes. What's the thought pattern? What's the process? Do you collaborate? Do you decide? Does Daniel decide? Is it a mix of both?
Yeah, it's kind of a blend of almost everything you just said, basically. When you think, read, and speak real estate kind of nonstop, a lot of you get a lot of ideas, right? So we try to do a mixture of just about everything. We do have the occasional guest on, right? You were one of the privileged few that's been,
and it was a great time.
and I appreciate you coming on. You'll be on again, all right? What we try to do when we do have the occasional guest on is make sure that they are a subject matter expert to be able to speak to certain things, right? And you're a subject matter expert in many. So how do you want to talk about mix? We have our paralegal to come on and talk about tenant issues. But overall, because, out of the 200 episodes, I think maybe we've had 20 interviews, maybe just over that, but not many. We try to have a blend of a few different things. So one, obviously breaking news, right? What's happening in the mortgage market, what's happening in the real estate space. We try to also tie that into larger topics affecting Canada: inflation, immigration, interest rates. But then we also boil it down and go literally like, how can we create real estate school almost, right? So like, what are the questions that I was asking when I was getting started, right? Do I buy this first property in a corporation or my personal name? Mm-hmm. Okay, boom, there's an episode. Do I look at a fixed or a variable for an investment property? Okay, well, that depends.
Don't go fucking variable.
Well, that depends. That depends on what you're doing, right? If are you doing a flip? Okay, like how do you understand mortgage products? What's even out there? Okay, boom, there's an episode. So we try to have a kind of cast a wide net between real estate investing fundamentals. You know me, I love to tell a story. So we also do we'll do profiles of like Sam Zell, for instance, like great, or like the Blackstone and its chief of staff or its kind of C-suite. Yeah, so just kind of like what lessons did these great people like base their lives and their investing principles off of. Then we'll also do stuff like I'll run into this in my own life. The first time we bought a portfolio of units instead of buying, ones and twos kind of thing, we ended up buying 12 homes. So it was like 30 units altogether. And I was like, that'd be a great episode. Buying a portfolio versus building a portfolio. What's the difference there? And now we've started to having a bit more fun, tell some other stories. So we're, there's one of the ones that just came out was there's a billionaire building a new city in California. And then that kind of sparks more research. It's like, well, who else is building new cities out there to solve housing crisis? Because there's housing crisis all over the world. Okay, well, Cairo in Egypt is building a new city. And actually a bunch of places in Africa are building new cities just out of the desert, like nothing. And then you go find out that China's built 600 new cities. Yeah. So we like to have a blend of like really useful information, breaking news and stuff that you can keep up with the economy, stories, history, and then always try to fill it with as much social currency as we can. So the next time you're at a cocktail party or something like that, you can drop a stat that you heard on our show and you can sound like the smartest guy in the room.
So you bring up an interesting point, and that is, I'm going to dovetail this into government involvement.
Oh, perfect.
We live in a country where government seems to be jumping on the housing bandwagon.
About time.
And they're making big promises to build, 3.8 million homes. Sorry, not billion, million. Sounds like billion.
May as well be.
And most recently, the city of Oakville just voted on returning the Government of Canada's Accelerator Fund money because they don't want density. Now, I didn't think that would be on the fucking bingo card, but something has triggered it.
Of course.
Here's NIMBYism, right?
Yeah.
Like, it's NIMBYism. Yeah. So, like, has government overstepped? Has government made promises that they just can't deliver? And, like, who's buying into this bullshit? Because it seems like it's not going to happen.
Well, first of all, if you're asking me if the government has overstepped and made false promises, the answer is fuck yeah. Obviously, as they all have and all do. And that's a bipartisan opinion. I'm not going to get really into my politics here, but you can probably guess what they are. I think that our current government has started to become very vocal recently. Very timely in an election cycle, and very timely in the sense that you couldn't ignore or avoid the problems that had come to be throughout your term. So, I mean, the Oakville thing, look, I know some friends. I got some friends that live in Oakville. They're the type, okay? They don't
NIMBYism.
They don't want you there. They don't want anyone there. They barely want me visiting. You know what I mean?
Not in your car.
Not in my car. Not with this hair. But I mean, look, Oakville. There's going to be more of that, right? Like you think Shaughnessy or some of these other pick an affluent neighborhood anywhere in whether it's Halifax or Calgary.
It's just not going to happen.
It's not going to happen. And the real question is, dare I say it, should it happen in those neighborhoods? Like, do families want to go in and be in the one, 5-plex within McMansions everywhere?
Listen, at the end of the day, this is a total clusterfuck. And the reality is government is stepping in a space that they have no business being in, and they've put their nose in a whole industry that they've actually just fucked up. Mistake after mistake after mistake, and at the end of the day, it's all about who you're letting in. They have. I've been knocking on this student visa issue for years. Yeah. When they went over 300,000 student visas, I said, guys, this is going to create a fucking problem. You're starting to take away housing that's designed and meant for residents, and landlords are going to be more appealing to students because they're nomadic.
Yeah.
Guess what? You're only going to be here a year, 2 years. I get to reset my rents. I don't have to deal with rent control. I don't have to deal... I was knocking on this door for years and no one would listen. And all of a sudden, here we are. It's a fucking shit show.
Yeah, I mean,
I don't know how people could not blame this government. Like they're finger pointing. It's like fucking Abbott and Costello, who's on first, what's on second skit, right? Like everybody's blaming each other. It's a fucking joke. And the reality is you have the keys to who walks into this door. Okay? And if you're not counting who's coming in, that's on you.
Yeah.
Right? Like it's getting to the point where it's a joke. It's an absolute, like who's controlling this shit? Benjamin Tal mentioned we got 1 million potential people that have gone past their expiry date on their visas.
Who's monitoring that?
Who's monitoring? Like Canada Border Services Agency, all they ask about is, do you have meat or cheeses when you come in the country? Yeah. Like they're not fucking asking, can I see your valid visa permit? No, do you have any meat or cheeses? Have you visited a farm? Like that's all they fucking care about. And it almost makes you wonder who the fuck is running things, because it's an absolute gong show.
It almost makes you wonder if that has something to do with, getting those votes for certain people. We won't get into that, but I completely agree. I think in a lot of ways, numbers always speak louder than words, right? And if all you needed to do, and this probably, you were probably saying this before this shit started happening, but all you needed to do in the last couple of years was look at these colleges, whether it was the real colleges that we know and that have existed for long periods of time, or the ones that randomly popped up in the shitty strip mall, 3 blocks away from, your nearest gas station, that were handing out degrees left, right, and center. And when those went up by the thousands of percent, not like, hey, wow, we doubled in size, but we went from
Conestoga College
that grew almost 4,000%. If anything grows 4,000%, look at the stuff that's grown 4,000% in the last couple of years. Okay, GameStop, Nvidia, cryptocurrencies. They've all been massive red flags. They've all had government attention. They've all had, interactions with mainstream media and everything like that. But how does, this happen and it kind of goes under the, behind the curtain, under the rug, whatever you want to call it, for this amount of time? And then only now to be like, oh shit, there might be an issue here. And not only that, but again, going back to, who we're letting in, we should be letting in people that are going to be contributing to our economy, that we can allow to contribute to our economy, right? Like this is supposed to be a mutually beneficial relationship. Right now, No one's benefiting. The people that came here are pissed, and I don't blame them. And
well, they were sold a bill of goods that doesn't exist.
They're sold a false dream, false hope, false dream. And the people that are here that are seeing the negative effects of millions of new people with no plan built around it are also pissed. So now we just have everyone pissed off and no solution. So I mean, look, we've got a long way to go. It took us a long way to get here. We've got a long way to go to get back out of it, right? I mean, housing crisis and recessions aren't created overnight, right? I mean, we were speaking about the last recession, really, which was in the 90s, right? Late 80s, early 90s. 30 years ago, here we are. Okay, we'll fix this in the next 5-10 years. And another 30 years, because humans don't learn the lessons, another 30 years we'll be back here.
So with all that being said, is this country set up for investors?
Well, considering I have the Canadian Real Estate Investor podcast, the answer is hell yes, Vince.
It really comes down to people understanding the opportunity, right? And they got to be patient in understanding that. And I think, hey, if you have the resources and the patience to follow through with an investment where they're not building 3.7 million homes.
Not even close.
It's not going to happen. People need places to live. You could be in a very good position.
I think even if we're not just speaking real estate wise, I think that you can find opportunity. You can find good investments wherever you are, whoever you are. You just have to look hard enough, work hard enough, and be creative. Right. And I think that goes back to what we were talking about earlier. Everyone just wants to make the quick buck, right? The work ethic, or not even the work ethic, because I'm not saying people don't work hard these days. I think a lot of people do work hard. I think it's harder to make that hard work turn into something, but that just means you've got to stick to it for longer, right? You can
start timelines, right?
Exactly. And I mean, you can start something and go really hard on it for a year. And guess what? You're probably not going to get anywhere. You start and go hard for 2 years. You might get somewhere. But 3, 4, 5, 10 years, I'm going to quote Bill Gates, and that's not because I'm a big Microsoft guy or like Bill Gates, but I love this quote. People always overestimate what they can do in a year and underestimate what they can do in a decade. So if you have your time horizons with whatever investment it is, whether it's GICs, the stock market, your drop shipping business, or your duplex that you just bought in Saskatoon, or your 5-plex that you're slowly going to renovate in somewhere in Toronto. I think people can make money anywhere, and I think there's opportunity anywhere as long as you understand investing fundamentals and you have realistic timeline expectations. The hard work and the capital that's going to go into getting that. Now you throw a recession in there and you throw supply and demand curves that are way off and some of that kind of stuff. That's just the spices to make that investment a hell of a lot better. So yeah, I think Canada is ripe for investment in the next several years. I think this is funny that I'm saying this now, as we've seen major foreign investment pull out of the country in the last quarter or two. But that's because guess what? That foreign investment where that foreign investment was coming from, those foreign countries, they're going through a lot of shit too, right? Look at what's happening in the China real estate sector. So if you look at economic long waves and short waves, and I'd encourage anyone who does have Twitter or X, there's this guy on there. I'm not a big Twitter X guy. Economic long wave.
He's a good guy.
I saw him years ago and I was like, I love history. And I think that we can learn.
It's a little bit long-winded.
It is a long way, long-winded. I think there's a ton of opportunity. And I think if you look at the cycles in history, right, they go like this, but they also go like this. And you just have to figure out where we are in that cycle, what your goals are, and be able to build that bridge or that staircase between where we are, what the opportunity is, and where you want to be.
It's a good way to end it. You post a couple shows a week.
2.
What days do they drop? On the Canadian Real Estate Investor podcast?
5 a.m. On Tuesday and Friday. Every Tuesday and Friday. I'd like to say that we have never missed an episode, no matter what.
Well, listen, I want to thank you for coming out I know this is a big deal for you to come all the way uptown, downtown.
I'd come to Spaducci anytime, Vince. You know that. I was like, am I coming? Is there a full dinner laid out here or something like that? Should I eat before?
Well, I promise you a lunch.
Okay, there we go.
We'll do that. So listen, thanks for coming out. I really appreciate the insight. I really love what you do. Keep it up. You and Dan are knocking it out of the park, and I wish you all the best. Thanks for coming out.
Thanks for having me. Appreciate it.
Bud.